I'm Dr. Gabriel Andrade from the Liberal Arts Department here at the College of the Marshall Islands. And today I'll be joined by Janet Hess, also from the Liberal Arts Department here at the College of the Marshall Islands. We will be speaking about world history and the place of the Marshall Islands in this regard. Hi, Janet. Welcome.
Hello.
The Marshall Islands are part of Micronesia. Micro means little islands. So I suppose that people in Paris and London and New York, they probably won't know where the Marshall Islands is. So in the big picture, how do the Marshallese fit in terms of world history?
For me, teaching world history at the College of the Marshall Islands, I teach both ancient history and modern history, somewhat modern history before 20th century. And we come across the Marshall Islands in the age of exploration, as Magellan and some of the other explorers come across the Pacific trying to circumnavigate the world. And we can chart the Marshalls as being a stepping stone type of country, as people in small sailing boats kind of work their way through. We also see interaction in world history with ships that were attempting to find the Northwest Passage from the California-Alaska side, okay. And they would come to the Marshalls to winter until the weather got better to continue their explorations of the west coast of the United States and Canada. The second time we come around to the Marshall Islands, of course, is in World War II.
All right.
And where the Marshalls are a key strategic part of both the Japanese and the American war in the Pacific. And then they have the nuclear legacy from after the World War II of the U.S. doing nuclear testing here. So those are the main points in history where modern history and ancient history where the Marshall Islands come into play as a strategic place in the Pacific.
Usually the way world history is taught, when ancient history is taught, they concentrate on the big civilizations, Greece, China, Egypt. Now the Marshall Islands obviously were not part of those great civilizations, but I suppose that nevertheless you teach your students about this. How do they feel about the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians? I mean, do they consider that that's something very alien to them, or do they say, hey, I mean, even though that's very far from here, we feel a connection with Greece and Rome and Egypt and all those places?
I think that one of the learning outcomes that and the thematic units that I try to infuse in my courses is not just a history of a bunch of old dead white guys. I have to somehow make it relevant for our students. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways that I teach is to always bring back the themes of subsistence to economy changes, of people moving to capital centers, of trying to find where education and knowledge fits in it with traditional knowledge. I think that there's something to be learned by our students about their own historical context if you can give them a framework to be able to study those ancient civilizations, be able to study what makes a civilization, be able to bring it back and view their own civilization, their own development through those lenses. I think it leads students, at least my students, the way I teach, it leads them to an understanding or to be able to ask questions about their own civilization, the growth of their civilization, what's missing, what's there, where they need to grow, as them as future leaders, hopefully, of this country, where that fits in a greater global entity.
Right. The Marshall Islands, very much as other Pacific countries, are becoming increasingly westernized. I mean, and the fact that we're doing this interview here at CMI in English is a major testament to that, right?
And I come from the West.
And so do I, of course. Now, obviously, the Marshallese, through American pop culture and, the use of English language and all of that, they're also becoming increasingly westernized. Do you think it will come to a point where they will say, we are also part of Western civilization? And, even though our geographic location is in the Pacific, I mean, we can relate a lot to the cultural roots of the West because we are already part of it.
I think the answer is yes and no. I think yes, definitely, because of the continuation of the Compact of Free Association with the U.S. That potential of migrating to a Western country, to the United States, through the Compact and through those benefits of the Compact, is important to our students to kind of plug them into Western ideas and Western ideals. I think that, of course, with the internet, of course, with the Westernization of the internet, for the most part, our students are getting a lot of that in a non-formal way as well as a formal way here at the College of the Marshall Islands. They do respect the fact that they are going to a Western accredited college, and with the hopes of many of them transferring to a college in the States. And I think that in order to survive and thrive in that environment, you have to almost be able to share some of the same values. Now, some of the research that I did for my thesis and was asking the question, how is information transferred orally to migrants or to those displaced from their land through the nuclear islands, or even adopted children who were given up for adoption to the U.S. How are they being taught, or are they being taught about their clan, their land rights, their culture, their language? I was surprised when I finished my research. I had to flip it back around because I was assuming and made an assumption that something was being lost. And in fact, what I found was just the opposite, was that information about clan, about land rights, the identity of people who were born and raised in the United States were actually identifying themselves as Marshallese, identifying themselves as Marshallese from their traditional island as well. And then when asked the third question, have you been there? And the answer was no, but you still consider yourself from Likiep. You still consider yourself from the Marshall Islands, a Marshall Islander, even though you were born and raised in the United States, is an anomaly. And you see pockets of Marshallese being raised in traditional ways, with traditional values of extended family and sharing and those things, as well as being raised in a Western environment. I think that there might be shifting sand under their feet. I think there might be conflicts within families that between Western and traditional ideas. I think our students our students of this generation are becoming more adept at being able to sift and sort through what they want and what they don't want.
Right, yeah, Westernization is a complex process.
Yes.
I mean, and it's a two-way process. Yeah, sure, I mean, some Pacific Islanders are becoming increasingly Westernized, sure, but when they move to Western countries, well, those Western cultures, they also adopt elements from Pacific culture. I'm sure that when I go back to Venezuela, I'm going to bring, Pacific foods and Pacific music
and Pacific ideas and Pacific pace of life.
Of course. That's the nature of cultural exchange, right?
Yes, and that's one of the things that make me, as a kind of world traveler, open to, and that's the beauty of traveling in this world. One of the things that I stress in my history classes, my world history classes, is that we talk about encounters and we talk about what one side brings in and what the other side brings into an encounter. And I show my students strategies on how to look at both sides of that encounter, whether it's the side you agree with or the side you disagree with, through the age of exploration, through the age of conflicts and revolution, how different people bring to an encounter their perspective of each other and their lives and their cultures, so that you can either adopt, change, learn, or reject those influences.
Of course.
I think it's discernment is the key.
Very well. Janet, we've run out of time, but thank you so much for coming. This has been a very enlightening conversation.
My pleasure.
And thank you, people, for having watched this video, and I hope I'll see you next time.